In today's episode, we're gonna dig into clenbuterol. So another, so to speak, fat burner, what people believe it is, but something that's widely used, most likely abused and misunderstood, and probably not talked openly about what it actually is useful for. What are the side effects? What are the harmful effects? Is it even legal? And all those kind of things. So open up, Scott, about what was the intention behind developing clenbuterol, where it is actually been used, where it is still used, and how is it used or maybe even abused in fitness, specifically when it comes to females and more or less likely bikini athletes and whatever else comes with it.
Yeah, clenbuterol is definitely one of the more widely abused compounds. I think it was patented in the 60s, but in medical use, they started using it for breathing disorders in the 70s, like asthma and things like that, because it's a bronchodilator. I think today now it's mostly not approved for human use in most countries, although some countries still use it for breathing disorders like asthma. Now it's got its popularity in the fitness industry, I think mostly because of its reputation of being, like you say, a fat burner. And it is definitely used and abused for that purpose. It's also very common in cattle and in veterinary medicine. I think they've even infused it in certain feed for animals. They have a microgram per dose per kilogram, and depending on the animal that it's being fed to, that's already infused right into their food, because it does definitely offer some anabolic properties, especially in animals. So it's basically just giving them a bigger weight for them to slaughter and make food.
So how does it how did it come about for bikini athletes specifically? What is most common things that you see people doing with it, and where are they going right, where are they going wrong, and maybe at pro level, where does it stack up in sense of popularity, or even what I would think is more important in terms of safety? So maybe touch up on that.
Clinton first got sort of utilized in sports and athleticism, not for its fat loss properties. It was actually, because it's a bronchodilator, it was used to improve oxygen consumption for performance athletes. I don't even know when it became the go-to fat-burning drug. In my opinion, that's one of its least effective properties. But in the bikini fitness industry, it became known as the fat burning drug, and that's all that they use it for. I don't even think they're aware of the other effects and what it was originally being abused in sports for. It is so popular. People like celebrities like Britney Spears has been caught using it, Victoria Beckham, all kinds of well-known names. Strippers use it, porn stars use it, and like you say, bikini athletes use it. I think typically it's probably coming from the bro coach who needs to get fat loss going quicker. Here's your clenbuterol dose. It's not a steroid. I don't know if that maybe helps encourage females to use it, because the taboo on steroids, like, well, this isn't a steroid, but this will burn fat. And because females are so interested in constantly getting lean, they seem to be willing, and then they start taking it. Unfortunately, the dosages typically are just kind of general. I believe they say somewhere on that 100 to 140 micrograms for males, and then anywhere from 80 to 100 for females. That's quite a bit of clenbuterol. I don't
to me, hearing those numbers, it feels like, Jesus, that's a lot.
Yeah, it really is a lot. And it, to me, I don't dose things that way, and I never have. So I don't understand that theory, but that's kind of the general way it was discussed and utilized, and that seems to be the way it sticks around. Anytime I have a new client coming in that uses clenbuterol, that's what they use. They used 100 micrograms or they used 80 micrograms, disregarding of what they weighed. It's almost like, here's your clen, off you go. And that's basically the protocol that they're given.
So what would people expect when they're using it? Because to me, because I've known these things, I've seen a lot of stuff. When you tell me anything over 40 micrograms, all I hear is anxiety.
Yeah.
So what's happening there? What actually happens physiologically when people take this thing? Why have they misconceptualized it and took it as a fat burner instead of muscle builder or something that helps you to get oxygen delivered to your muscles in a more efficient way and whatnot? So where does this come actually from, and what happens in human body when somebody takes this?
Well, clen is very similar to ephedrine, which we talked about last episode, in that it is a stimulant and it does activate the adrenergic receptors. Now, the difference between them is ephedrine was a non-specific adrenergic receptor, activator. It kind of just hit the alpha and beta receptors, where clen is got a direct affinity to the beta 2 receptor. Ephedrine did as well, but it also had beta 1 and alpha receptors. Clen doesn't seem to have as much of an effect on those as that beta 2. That beta 2 receptor agonism is what's going to increase that cyclic adenosine monophosphate. So CAMP goes up. If CAMP goes up, then that hormone sensitive lipase goes up. And if that goes up, fat liberation or fat mobilization increases. And that's clen's effect on fat, fat loss. It's basically mobilizing it like ephedrine did, but it's more potent with a longer half-life.
So that to me sounds, it's doing part of the job. It basically lets your body to liberate the body fat. So now you go and do the job, and now you will be more efficient because part of the job is done already. You don't need to spend so much time going through all the processes. Now all you need to do is just burn that body fat that's in your bloodstream.
Yeah, like if we remember, we talked about in the last episode, we have to mobilize fat first. We have to get the triglycerides out of the cell into the blood. If you can't get it out, you can't burn it. So you mobilize the fat, you transport it to the mitochondria, and then it's oxidized or burned.
So if you just take this and go sit on a couch, nothing's going to really happen.
From it's still going to liberate triglycerides into the bloodstream, but if you don't do anything, it's not really going to have much of an opportunity to oxidize them. But also, like ephedrine, there is a slight increase in the thermogenic effect of the body, so there is a little bit of an additional fat burning quality from that. And I think that's where people go wrong with clen. They take clenbuterol, they get that sympathetic response, maybe shaky a little bit, heart rate up a little bit, blood pressure up a little bit, all the things similar to ephedrine. But because that's the sympathetic response, those receptors sort of, downregulate or whatever terminology you want to use. Those symptoms seem to kind of dissipate over time, and then people think that the drug's not working anymore. But that's not the case. The direct sympathetic response is less effective, but that's its thermogenic effect, its fat liberation effect, its myostatin inhibition effect, its oxygen improved consumption effect. All those things still go. They're basically drug dependent. If you take that drug, that effect happens. So people started to just say, oh, you have to cycle clen on off because it loses its effect. And that's not really accurate. It loses some effect, not all of it. And really the effect that it's losing isn't really the main benefit of it anyways, but even in the fat loss goal, that's not its best thing. The best thing is its ability to mobilize the triglycerides for your activity to be fueled, if that makes sense.
So it almost sounds, things that you mentioned, increased heart rate, increased blood pressure, increased fidgeting, the way we can best describe, does not mean it's more effective than if you don't feel these things. It still works, and you shouldn't be chasing side effects and focus on effects instead.
Right. I always say stop chasing the side effects. It's just like in training, people are always chasing soreness as an indicator of a good training session. That's a terrible metric to be measuring. Um, so same with Clen. Like if you don't get that jitterness anymore, it's just because your body's adapting to it. It doesn't mean it's not working anymore. You can't take a drug, a chemical into your body and it just stopped working because you've been taking long enough. Like it doesn't work that way. It can lose some efficacy over time, but again, it's a small percentage of what that total ability that drug has is being hindered slightly, and not to any drastic amount. And the sort of similar effects you get from ephedrine, but because ephedrine was that non-selective receptor activator, you usually get a higher heart rate, a higher blood pressure, and stuff like that from ephedrine than you do from Clen, because Clen is pretty specific on that beta 2. There are beta 2 receptors throughout the body, but beta 1 receptors are more so in the heart, and that's why if ephedrine's activating both, they'll get a stronger increase in heart rate, blood pressure, etc. from ephedrine than Clen. But Clen does cause some. In fact, if you look at the side effects, Clen and ephedrine are going to be listing the same things, because they're so similar in that sense.
So we are talking about these things because a lot of people are just hiding these things, and they just go, hey, do 10,000 steps a day and you're going to look like me, when in reality, they're probably doing a million other things that they are just not open about. And this brings me to asking you, is there any kind of implications that you would go through health markers of the person who's reaching out for your advice, and you tell them, hey, you know what, these things are out of whack, you should never come near, let's say, clenbuterol? Is there something that you would definitely tell a person who comes to you if they have something out? What are those readings, if they even exist?
For sure. And to be fair, I don't encourage a drug ever. I literally just, because I don't really think like this is good and this is bad. I just think of supplements, pharmacological approaches. I just think of all these things as options. And then depending on the client, their goal, like you're mentioning, their health markers, I just lay out for them their best options for what they're trying to achieve. If they come to me and they say, yeah, I want to use something to help me, whatever, burn fat, breathe better, whatever they're using, if Clen fits that profile, then we will look at their markers. And if they had a very high resting heart rate, or maybe some hypertension in terms of their blood pressure, I don't think something like a stimulant where blood pressure and heart rate are going to be increased is a good idea. But if used, I don't want to say it's safe, because no drug use is ever safe, but if used in a responsible manner with health markers in check, they're more effective than dangerous, in my opinion. But that being said, I wouldn't be jumping to these things right away, because like we've talked about before, you want to have the root foundation established. Like if you're trying to get leaner, as in lose body fat, you need to be in an energy deficit. So that should be put in place first. And I would always start by looking at my energy balance, calories in versus my energy output, and determining where we're at. I wouldn't just say, oh, it's time to lose some fat, start taking Clen. I think there's many steps ahead that could be offering the same benefit with less potential side effects. So it sort of depends, but in terms of like a health markers, it's going to be cardiovascular markers that you're looking at, that Clen's going to have the biggest impact on acutely. So those would be the potential red flags before administering something like a sympathetic nervous system stimulant like Clen, or even ephedrine.
So if somebody comes to you with resting heart rate of 120 beats per minute, it's a red flag and a no-go.
Yeah, I would say that's a red flag. I would say that's a red flag, period. Never mind what drug can I use with this. I would think like, well, we need to get this in check first.
Would you say that the underlying thing for everything we are talking about is you should never go near it until you are actually healthy?
No, not necessarily, because sometimes depends on the demographic, but I have seen and work with people where the drug was theoretically dangerous, but it improved their current health marker because their health markers were so out of whack. I mean, sick people need medicine, and without it, they're even more sick. So sometimes that's not necessarily the case, but I do think that in general, like we've talked about, the foundation needs to be there first. People need to have the main building blocks in place before they start throwing all these drugs at it, because they just have an unstable foundation and now a whole bunch of variables being thrown at it, and it's just very hard to know what's going on and how to effectively change things for the better.
So what does that mean? Make sure that you check the changes over time, over being obsessed that you are 100% healthy and this and that. But if you're going this route, make sure you know where you're actually starting. Instead of walking in a gym, or this will be the most casual way. You walk in, you start working with somebody and they go, hey, you need to take this, you need to take that. I've had so many people saying, like, even my clients, and they're telling them, hey, unless he gives you these drugs, you're not going to get in shape. To me, it's like, dude, if you can't get somebody in a shape without any drugs, you are clueless. You just don't know what you're doing. You definitely shouldn't be teaching anyone what they should be doing.
I 100% agree. I actually am a big believer, and this is why it's, this isn't sexy and trendy, so this doesn't sell, but I'm a big believer in less is more. So if I can get away, if I have somebody that's making progress with push-ups, I'm going to let them do push-ups. I don't need you to start bench pressing yet, or maybe ever. If I'm making progress with something as basic as that can be, why do I need to have more? Because eventually that's going to run its course and I'm going to have to add things or change things. If I throw everything at you at once, then when that runs its course, what do? We just have to start doing more, taking more, adding more, like always more. And then you run into, well, the problems that most people see in the fitness industry, which is, being sold lies, smoke and mirrors. And then the real reality is off camera, they don't look like they do on camera, because that was like a throwback or a moment in time, where the rest of the time they're sick and fucking miserable and who knows what else.
So what does it do in terms of your psychology? Does this affect you in any way, the way you think, maybe feel, or all those kind of things? And then maybe afterwards touch up on anabolic effects as well. So is clenbuterol efficiently able to change your psychology?
In terms of like a rewiring of some sort, not that I'm aware of, but like any sort of stimulant, like caffeine, ephedrine, it's going to make you more alert. So you will be potentially more alert, more focused or something, because of that sympathetic response. But I'm not aware of any actual long-term psychological effects other than abusing it. Potentially, it can increase the risk of anxiety and things like that. But I think that's going to also come from an individual that maybe has some predisposition to those types of things. There are a lot of people that will run clenbuterol endlessly without necessarily any issues. Like, it is still prescribed for asthma in some parts of the world, and they're using that all the time. So I think it's going to kind of be more a little bit specific to the individual, but they can have short-term effects or possibly long-term effects that indirectly affect that. Like, it can have sleep disturbance problems. And if your sleep is disrupted and you go with long-term sleep deprivation, that can send you down a path with like possibly changing psychological thoughts, hormonal, disruptions, everything, because sleep is so important. But a direct effect, I'm not aware of anything other than, potential abuse of it and things like anxiety. But there are also other risks with long-term effects and abusing a drug when it comes to like heart disease risk increases, stroke increased risk, potential liver, kidney damage. Again, but that's an abusive sort of relationship with it and long-term. But the same thing could be said about any stimulant.
Talk to me about anabolic effects of this, because it sounds almost that it might be something that's better used in females specifically to actually gain more lean muscle, instead of abusing it to get leaner when you haven't even built anything first.
I find clenbuterol to be an incredibly effective anabolic drug for females. I would sooner, if I have a female that has some hesitations of masculinizing effects from anabolic use, like anabolic androgenic steroid use, I would offer Clen as an option because it is anabolic in females. The research doesn't seem to support anabolic effects in humans, but the sort of anecdotal evidence that we've seen since the 90s and Dan Duchesne realizing this, it's an undeniable thing. And I see it in my female clients as well. If they are wanting to use performance enhancing drugs, and this is one of the options they're willing to use, this one is usually in play, not necessarily for its fat loss abilities, but for its anabolic properties. It's very effective for sure.
And I think what you mentioned is quite good point. It does not have the side effects that you would usually have from performance enhancing drugs that are usually thrown around in bikini, so to speak, community. So you're not going to grow a beard, and you're not going to grow massive genitalia and whatever else comes with all those things. You have great shoulder cap and you have something bulging out of your pants. So this is not the case with clenbuterol then.
No, it's not. It's not a sex hormone, so it's not going to be affecting that pathway. If a female is willing, and God hoping they are always willing, and they never are, to take their time to grow the physique they want, something like a little bit of growth hormone and clenbuterol would give them all the muscle they'll probably ever want, assuming they're not looking to be, a bodybuilder, with none of the hormonal disruptions that they would get from anabolic androgenic steroids. But the timeline would be much longer, because from an acute point of view, nothing can grow muscle faster than steroids. But over time, because females are so sensitive to these things, they can grow a significant amount of muscle with clenbuterol. It happens all the time. So if that is something that they are wanting and steroids is off the table, it's a good option, assuming certain criteria fits. But it should still be used in a relatively responsible manner, because no drug comes without its possible risks. And Clen has some, just like anything else.
So what are the legal issues with it? It doesn't sound like it's anything legal. I don't think you can buy it over the counter unless you go somewhere, Turkey or whatever, or Mexico, and just ask. So what are the legalities behind it, and what are there any considerations that people need to take in place when somebody offers them? Because you'll hear it all the time. Somebody in gym goes and works with their personal trainer or something, and they go, "Hey, you need to take this, and I'll get you in shape for a beach." Yeah, you probably shouldn't, because it's not legal.
Well, it's definitely a banned substance. Like it's got a much tighter grip on it than, say, ephedrine does. It's on the IOC and WADA list, like any athlete with this in the system, that's a drug suspension. It is approved for human use in certain countries in the world, but that would be prescription only, I'm sure. And I've never really looked into what countries that would be. It's definitely not around here. It's definitely not North America, anything like that. So I don't know where it would be. In other words, it is an absolutely banned substance. Yet anyone can seemingly find it on the internet all over the place. It is probably the most abused drug, I would say, in the fitness industry, and I think it's because it sort of gives that edge, crosses the innocence line, but doesn't quite get to that taboo steroids thing. And I think that's the hesitation. I think if people realized how potentially I don't want to say risk-free, but how potentially low risk proper anabolic androgenic steroid use can be used, I don't think it would have the same, taboo effects or risk as it does. Because Clen is just as risky. It's just a different thing. You have to consider yourself more being aware of the cardiovascular system, where with steroids, it's more that hormonal pathway. But it's still a drug. It still has to be treated as such with a bit of respect. but it is definitely the most abused. And I think the dosages are misused. I think people are taking too much. And I think that's coming from the typical that 100 microgram dose. I don't dose it that way, and I think that's part of the problem. Now it's still going to be working, but they're going to be suffering more of those potential, side effects: the jitterness, the possible muscle cramping, dehydration. With clenbuterol use, you're going to want to increase fluid intake just because the potential dehydration. But this is always a dose-dependent thing. So if they're taking more, you're going to have a higher blood pressure, a higher heart rate, higher risk of all these things. Headaches are common, sweats, like I said earlier, sleep disturbance. It's all there, and it's going to be mostly dose related. So if you can get the effect you're looking for with a 20 microgram or 40 microgram intake versus 100, you're going to see, probably the same effects beneficial wise, maybe slightly less, with none of the unwanted effects, in theory.
So looking on that, it feels like no matter where you are, well, let me rephrase that. So even if you see the girl who is a bikini competitor, really lean and whatnot, and she's telling you, I'm not taking any performance enhancing drugs, she might be just taking clenbuterol anyway, getting great results. But now she doesn't have this massive square jaw, and her voice is not changing, definitely doesn't start getting bald and things like that. But you need to still be aware that if she looks great all year round, she might be playing with something like this. And even though it sounds like safety profile is quite good, it's still largely abused because people chase side effects instead of effects, and they are just living in this misconception that I need to have these anxiety and shaking of hands and whatnot for this drug to be useful, but it's in no means legal. Pretty much anywhere you go and look. But a lot of people will be using this thing just because of its safety profile and efficiency. But looking on all this, what other means are out there that offer anything similar? Is there anything like that at all?
I think ephedrine and clenbuterol are quite similar. Clenbuterol is going to have an edge in certain things, and ephedrine has an edge in certain things. When it comes to fat loss, I guess it depends on how you classify it, because there's a thermogenic effect from both drugs that seemingly is quite similar. So you take it, body temperature goes up, you get X amount of fat oxidation from the increase in body temperature, and that seemingly is quite similar. And that's the effect that will wear off as you continue chronic use of these drugs, clenbuterol specifically. But then the way it liberates body fat, that doesn't seem to dissipate over chronic use. So if you're utilizing them and then you're doing activity as you should, that's going to continue to work. They both offer what seems to be some anabolic properties. I think Clen takes the edge here quite significantly. Ephedrine seems to reduce the amount of nitrogen we excrete. Therefore, it has a muscle sparing effect long term. But that's most likely going to be with people that have inadequate protein intake normally. If you have adequate protein intake, you're not going to be in a negative nitrogen balance at the end of the day anyways. So that one almost kind of is negated from that, where clenbuterol seems to have a myostatin inhibition with it. And you think of myostatins, it's a protein basically the body's creating to almost limit the amount of muscle you can be building, kind of like a rev limiter on a car or a governor. It's just not allowing you to get past a certain amount of muscle building capacity. Clenbuterol seems to inhibit that. So now it's getting an anabolic effect indirectly from the reduction of myostatins. So they're different. They have seemingly similar effects via different mechanisms, but Clen is more potent with a longer half-life. So it probably trumps ephedrine big picture wise. But I would say ephedrine is probably the closest thing to it. And now you just start weighing out the risk reward. Cleanse a non-specific receptor activator. The legality is less, than less, I guess, restrictive than Clen, but it's slightly less effective. So it's kind of one of these, weigh out your pros and cons.
From all of that, it's kind of clear it's definitely illegal. But
Definitely illegal.
first things that people usually will go and get in sense of being told, hey, what to use will be Anavar or things like that. That can definitely change your physiological features, the way you look, sound, and all those kind of things. So clenbuterol might be a better choice if you go that route. You still need to do the work. You can't just take it and then still do your office job. You still need to go and work out, do some cardio, do some weight training, all those kind of things. It probably is more beneficial from anabolic standpoint in terms of muscle growth rather than just fat loss. So, and we know that more muscle is better for anyone. Mm-hmm. And by the sound of it, because of the medical use for it, it can be taken for a very long time, and we don't seem to have anything that shows, hey, if you take very low to moderate dosage, you'll still be safe because it's been used in medical setting. Is that right?
Well, I would, yes, in theory, but I would always kind of err on the, no matter what, there's a risk. It's never going to be safe. But yes, when we're dosing things a little bit more responsibly or more in a therapeutic sense, the risk-reward ratio, I think, is relatively in our favor. Hence, they created this drug, and this drug is being used. But I like what you said there about people are chasing the effects and therefore taking more of the drug. And I think that's spot on with a lot of the problem why they're taking so much. I wouldn't give 80 micrograms to a bikini athlete because a bikini athlete doesn't weigh 80 kilograms. So from an anabolic point of view, I think you can get away with half of a microgram per kilo. Just put it in and go. That's such a low dose that I don't think you need to worry about long-term issues, provided you don't have any, predispositions. And it's going to give you that anabolic effect that is not going to wear out, not going to dissipate, not going to sort of disappear. In fact, there is some people that believe that it gets more effective over time, over chronic use from that aspect. From the fat loss point of view, maybe up to a microgram per kilo is about as high as you want to go. I think that if you need to be taking more, you've got your timeline fucked up or your periodization is wrong. I think you just miscalculated something. I wouldn't be taking more drug to compensate for a shorter duration of time unless you absolutely had no choice, that deadline was non-negotiable. Like maybe Miss Olympia, we know that every year she's doing that category of that day. I would hope at that level they're not screwing up their timelines. But if they did, that would be the only case where it's possibly okay in your mind, I guess, to surpass those dosages. But in general, I wouldn't. I would say around a microgram per kilo, give or take, that's about where I would cap that off. And if that's not enough, then probably something else needs to be looked at. Like you could take more, but at that point now, you're taking more, which I think is going to further increase risk versus reward significantly more risk than reward at that point.
Awesome, Scott. Well, this is, I think, very thorough and just explanation about what's actually is out there, what's happening out there, why you see so many people lean all year round, and more often than not, inside they are not as healthy, probably not even healthy mentally as much as they are physically. You probably have seen, and myself often, that people go and suddenly say, I'm not going to compete this year, I need to take a break, just because they are under so much pressure to be lean all year round, which involves abstaining from a lot of social events, pretty much putting your life on pause. And it's not good, it's not healthy. And I hope more and more people start coming out and telling the truth, and also encouraging people, stop chasing that leanness all year round. It's not healthy. It's just not something that's happening natural in nature. And the sooner you accept that you need to go through seasons all year round, the healthier your approach will be to your own body. And I don't know for yourself, but for me, health should come first. And then you can chase your six-pack abs and massive glutes and everything else.
I think I understand how important it is to look a certain way in society today, especially with, you know, social media and everyone's judging a book by its cover. But from my experience, and I've been coaching now for over 2 decades, and I've worked with a lot of females. If you're letting your physique dictate your overall happiness, it's seemingly, in my experience with women doing that, that they're quite unhappy in general, and it has a pretty negative, vicious, downward spiral effect on literally everything, right down to the relationships.
Yeah.
It is a bit sad to see, and I know there's a lot of pressure on women to look a certain way, and the pressure is now coming onto men, because now men have to do the same advertisement. Now I'm seeing the 20-year-olds that want on steroids, and I'm saying the same thing, like, you're making a fucking mistake. Just hold on here, buddy. But so I get it, but
And best part of that is 20-year-olds hopping on steroids without being in gym first. Like,
yes,
I haven't trained yet. What are you on about?
yeah, and they're going to experience some good times for a few years that are going to be irreplaceable and not being able to be repeated. And then in a decade from now, they're going to be a depressed, fat, miserable mess.
Yeah.
With
And
me.
hating the industry.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely.
Yeah. Awesome, Scott. Really appreciate your time. And I'll speak to you next video.
That sounds great. Thank you.